Okay, this video is going to continue on in our beginner AutoCAD kind of drafting and design series. And so far we have essentially covered kind of the basic overview of AutoCAD. We've learned some modified tools, but almost essentially all we've done is cover lines as far as objects, drawing objects. We just briefly got into polylines last time, but this video is gonna cover the different types of shapes we can draw, and kind of how they all work together, and we can create actual objects, or at least looking 2D looking objects. Um, so just to start out here, we've done lines, which L is our keyboard shortcut. We've done polylines, which is PL is our keyboard shortcut. I'm going to turn snapping off. We have learned about ortho mode, and we've learned about snapping so far. But so far we've only basically just done these straight lines. So in thinking about lines, now we have learned ways to draw a closed polygon using polylines. And again, if we type the exact distances, say for a polyline, we can start, and if we turn on ortho, we could go 200, 500, 200, say, and then we could even hit C for close, and we just made a rectangle essentially, right? There is an actual function or a command in AutoCAD to make a rectangle directly, and it's REC is the keyboard shortcut. And so we can either just draw it, and you can see how you basically specify a beginning point, and then you can come in and just either set it, or you can specify the dimensions. So we can say 500 that way, 200 that way. Okay, and we get the same thing as this. Okay, very simple. I won't say there's not a lot of times you draw rectangles, but a lot of times you can just use polylines or something similar. But you know, that is another shape that's kind of built in that you can draw. Another one, obviously we haven't covered, is a circle. So if we just type C for circle, okay, now let's look at the options here. So a typical circle, obviously, will have a center point and either a radius or diameter. Obviously, same general idea. So if we look here, it'll say specify the center point for the circle. So we can click there, and then now it's asking for the radius of the circle, or we could put in diameter, but obviously that's just simple math to get the difference in the two. But just depending on how much math you want to do, you may have something listed where it's only the diameter or only the radius. So we can say I want a radius of 500, and these are big because I drew some of these lines pretty big to start out. So now we have a perfect circle. So the circle command will always draw a perfect circle from a center point. Now, when we select it, now we have grip edits here, and you have a grip edit for each, essentially a quadrant and the center. Now, if you grab the center, you can't do anything but move it, but that's fine. And so that's a quick and easy way to move a circle. If you grab one of the quadrants, it will actually resize the circle. Now, we covered the offset command previously when we were talking about lines. We didn't do this for polylines. I just kind of want to show you a different example. So if we did offset and say, let's, I think, do 50 based on these sizes. For a line, we can just simply offset it. And again, it keeps a parallel to our original line, and it's essentially exactly the same thing offset. For a polyline, we can do the same thing, and we can offset it to the outside or to the inside. But if you'll note, when it goes to the outside, this line is actually a little bit longer when we come on the inside because it's offsetting an exact distance. But you see, if we kept offsetting, this thing's become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because it's the distance that maintains the exact, but in all parallel, okay? Now for a circle, it's a similar thing that we can offset it to the outside and make a bigger radius circle, or we can offset internally and keep making smaller circles. Because if you think about it, if you're offsetting and everything needs to be exactly parallel to the original thing at a set distance, for these types of shapes, it has to make it smaller, similar for a rectangle. And we keep making the object smaller until we hit to a point here it can't offset that object any smaller than that. Okay, so that's a little bit of difference and just kind of a quick lesson in these different shapes when you go to offset them, kind of what that does. So when thinking about circles too, there's a couple differences. So let's say we wanted to draw a line, and we wanted, looking at the snaps that are available with circles, we can hit shift right click. So these are more circular based. We have center, quadrant, and tangent. So the center makes sense. Here it is. Here's the center. Now, one note about the center of a circle: if you just start in the center or you're very zoomed in, it doesn't like to snap because it wants you to point to the circle for which you're getting the center point from. Then you can come. But even if you're way out here, if the green shows up, it automatically pops there. But if you started here and hit center, it doesn't know what object you want the center of, even though you're close to the center of the object. Okay, so that works a little bit different than, say, an endpoint. So it'll just find an endpoint. It doesn't need to know what, or you don't have to hover over the line then find the endpoint. But here you need to kind of come out here, and then you can go back in if you want. So we can, if we just wanted to come to the outer circle, now we could do a nearest, or another thing you can do is actually go perpendicular. So that would get you essentially to either side or the quadrants. Okay. But let's say we had a line out here, and so there's 4 quadrants, and these are essentially just kind of the coordinate directions for each circle, and it's pretty basic for that. But that's not always very useful. A thing that is very useful, so if you're designing parts and things that have curves and circles, is tangent. So tangent is the point on the edge of a circle that this line will only touch one time and then it'll continue on. So there's only a single point on each side of the circle that is tangent to any line. Okay, so we could do that. We could go tangent here, and for example, if we wanted to make that in some, we could actually use these two to clip this, something like that, and now we have a rounded corner for these 2 lines. Okay, another way to do something similar to that, let's just say we had a line here and we have a line here. So when we're drawing our circle, remember again, there's multiple ways to do this. So if we know a center point, we can specify the center point, or there are different options. So it can either be 3P, which is 3 points. If we click that, it'll tell you you can define a circle by 3 different points. Same thing with 2 points. So let's do circle, and we'll do 2P. And so this is the circle's diameter, though. So we'd have to come from here to here, so if it fits there. But if we wanted to create this same looking shape, this rounded corner that's perfectly tangent to these two lines, we can actually do that. And right here, TTR, it's tan radius. So what we're looking for is a line. We'll type that in, TTR. So now it says specify first point on object for first tangent of circle. So essentially what we're going to do is tell it, I want it tangent to this line, so the first tangent, tangent to this line, the second tangent, and then tell it a radius. So we're going to click here, that's the first tangent. Click here, that's the second tangent. And again, it doesn't matter where you click on this line, it's just somewhere on that line is what we're telling it needs to be tangent to. And then now we can say the radius of the circle, and let's just say we want, I don't know, say 250, see if that fits. Now, see, that was too small, but if you see, if you continued this line out, it would be tangent to that circle. So let's do a bigger one. TTR, do tangent, tangent, and I'll do a 500. Now, you can see here, that circle is exactly tangent to that line, exactly tangent to that line, and now has a radius of 500. So now here it's a little trickier about trimming this because we have a full circle, but we also have these edges sticking out. So if we just use these two the same way we did over here to trim the circle, we still have the edges sticking out. But if we highlight all three of them, we can trim the ends off, and then we can trim that part off. Now, one thing I just noticed that I did that I haven't mentioned before is just the undo. So Control Z will undo your last actions. Now, something to note in AutoCAD, every time you move, you pan, or you zoom in and out, because if you remember the video where I talked about zooming and panning as actual tools, AutoCAD sees that as an actual tool that you use. So if you hit Control Z to undo, it undoes the pan, it undoes the zoom before it undoes actual functions. Okay, whereas a lot of programs, it doesn't consider zooming in and out as part, or panning around as part of an actual function that it needs to undo. You know, it's be like in Microsoft Word, if you scrolled up and down a document and then type something, that if you undid it, it would undo the scrolling up and down. Okay, but AutoCAD does see it that way, so that's just something to keep in mind. But again, Control Z is the shortcut that's kind of similar across all Windows products. So that's just kind of a quick aside there. So another way, so we talked about creating this rounded edge, and we did this over here as well. But another way to do it, let me just draw a couple lines in ortho mode, and I'm just going to draw them so I know they're connected already, right here. But say we want this rounded edge. Okay, another tool to get that is called a fillet. And if you see up here, it's fillet, and it basically rounds the edge of an object. So F is for fillet, and so you can either select the two objects and nothing happens, or maybe it did, but the problem is we didn't set a radius, and probably the default radius is extremely small here. So we need to look, and the first thing we need to do is select radius. So R for radius, and let's set it back to 500. Now we can go in, set our objects, and see how it automatically does it for us and pulls it in. But the nice thing about this is we started with two lines, here, and then now we have essentially an arc or part of that circle. If we would have used polylines, so say we did this as a polyline and did the fillet, so R for radius, now it keeps the same, the last thing you use normally, and we selected this side of the polyline and this side of the polyline, it turns that fillet to be part of the polyline, so it's a full feature, and that's pretty nice. So that's kind of giving you an overview of some different things. Now, there is another function that's arcs. They're a little bit more unwieldy than kind of doing some of these rounded corners and things, but there are times when you need to make arcs. And there's multiple different ways to make an arc. Normally, it says it has to specify a start point, and then you have a second point. So these are kind of the two ends of the arc, and then you can kind of bend it around. Okay, but like I said, obviously they can go all different shapes and ways, but they can kind of get a little bit unwieldy. Normally, your second point can be more like your center point, depending on how you do it. And then again, there are multiple ways to draw arcs, but as far as most design, they're not as useful to just draw a direct arc versus drawing a circle that is tangent to two lines. So think of this as, say, an intersection. So this roadway curves into this one, or a driveway or something like that. With the circle, we know exactly, and I know you can do these with arcs, but to me this is a little bit easier to do like in this way. Okay, so that just kind of covers a little bit more of the different shapes and kind of how to modify them and snap to them as we've done in the past. Let's kind of build on that. So I think that's going to be it for this video, and we'll see you next time.